This is a dream I'm going to call the Night Battle. This dream was in first person, and I had this dream in September of 2023. It was dark. It was nighttime. I was with a group of people. All the people were wearing ragtag clothes, almost like we were all refugees. It was a mixture of people. There was about 30 people. There was kids, there was elderly, women and men, various races. And we were traveling through a field, over some hilly fields, with woods on the outside and stuff like that, almost like the foothills of Appalachia. We all had weapons, but these weapons weren't like military or anything like that. It was like hunting rifles, old single barrel rifles. Some people had spears, a couple people had machetes. But that was what we had. And we were walking along with torches. Nobody had anything electrical. So we were traveling along and we came upon a shack. And the shack was at the base of a cliff. So there was a cliff behind it, pretty high cliff. And the shack was at the bottom of it. And it was a typical, what you would imagine, cabin / shack in an area like an Appalachia area. You know, front porch, simple, large, 1-room, maybe 2-room shack. We ushered all the children into the shack with several of the ladies. And they went in, and I guess they were going to sleep. And the rest of us stayed outside. It was chilly. You could see your breath. We stayed outside with the torches. We were going to all keep guard and keep track of stuff. Several of us were hanging around on the outside. So a bunch of us were underneath the porch, sitting down, stuff like that. So we were all just standing around, all the men and some of the women, outside of the shack. About 10 minutes after all the kids and women got ushered inside the shack, we had a figure jump down from the roof, and then 5 other figures jumped down as well. And they grabbed one of the gentlemen that was standing there, middle-aged gentleman. They grabbed him and they started ravaging him, like dragged him a little bit further away, like maybe 20 yards from the shack, and they started just tearing at him, and he's like screaming. A bunch of the folks took up their weapons and started shooting at these figures. These figures they looked like monkeys, but their tails were like snakes. They rattled like a rattlesnake. And their face looked like a lion without hair. So almost like a kind of Gollum figure face to it. Gollum from the Lord of the Rings. So they were ripping him apart, and several of the peoples took up their weapons and started shooting at him. At the figures. And even though the figures were being hit, it wasn't doing any damage. They weren't bleeding. They weren't stopping. They were just getting angry. One of the ladies next to me raised her gun to shoot, and I stuck out my arm to stop her and raised her weapon up a little bit with my arm. And I was like, it's not going to do any good. And right about that time, we heard a voice. All of us did. And the voice said to march down towards them, singing praise and worship. So one of the ladies started singing the song Ancient of Days. And we all started chiming in, singing it. And as we marched down towards them. And as we were singing, the figures stopped clawing at the guy and turned at us and started snarling. So, several of them started covering their ears, and it almost like it was paralyzing to them to hear the music being played. Then we had heard a voice that said, "Strike them with the sword." So one of us that was walking near them pulled a sword out and sliced their arm, but it healed back almost instantly, almost like a salamander or lizard or whatever that grows their limbs back. But this happened almost quite quickly. I drew out a sword and I swung and took off one of their heads, completely severing it completely. And the other figures freaked out and ran off. Black, dark blue blood that was thick like tar or syrup oozed out from the neck of the one that was severed. And almost before our eyes, the body started rapidly decaying, the body of this figure. We helped the man up who was pretty hurt and scraped up, and we went back to the shack, to the porch. Several of the women and the people that were outside were severely shaken up by what they saw, as there was evidence that they were demons or spiritual beings of some sort, but they were on the physical plane. And they were active. And one of the older people, an older gentleman, turned into the rest of us and said, "This has changed the whole thing. Everything has changed now." And that was the end of the dream.